Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 2 of Python for Beginners. Today we're going to be talking about variables. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new file here and name it variables.py. Close the old file. And so basically, to get you antiquated with variables, variables are pieces of data that we associate with a name that can store information for us. So just a way to quickly illustrate this is just we can say that the number 1 is going to be equal to 1. And in this case, we're creating what is called a statement. And we're assigning the number 1, which is called an int. I'll get into that in a second. We're assigning this number to this name of 1. So we can refer to 1, O-N-E, as this number. And we can change any name. The name can be anything. So any name. And we can just we can put this to 395. You can assign any name to any number, but you must be careful not to use special characters or numbers at the beginning of your Python variables because those are not valid. So now that you know what variables are, let's go through the different data types that you can assign to variables. So we already saw that you can use a number, and a number in Python is called an int. Stands for integer, and it's any whole number that does not have a decimal point. So this includes negative and positive numbers. Now, the other numeric data type besides an int is something called a float. So we'll say float variable, and we're going to assign float variable equal to 1.25. Now, if we hover over this, Visual Studio Code will very nicely tell us that this is a float. A float is any number that has a decimal point with numbers after it. And this can be useful. You can see where the difference may lie. When you're talking about people, you're only ever going to talk about an int with people because you're never going to have a half of somebody. But with a float, you might be using something like change, and then you will need the cents, which are the numbers after the decimal point. So that is a float. And then the next variable that we have is something called a string. I'll just say string variable. And a string is just a list of characters. So you can use either single quotes or double quotes. It doesn't matter in Python. And you can say this is a string. And so all a string is just a phrase, a bunch of characters, but it can also be just one character as well. So typically in other languages, you'll find a data type called a char, which is a single letter, but Python just treats one letter or multiple letters as a string. And then the final data type we have is something called a Boolean. So we'll say bool variable. This can be equal to either true or false. And this type of variable will be more useful later on when you get into more complex programs. It may seem simple, but it can help keep your code organized and simplify it quite a bit. So I just have a couple more things I want to talk about, and one of them is something called reserved keywords. And it basically means that you cannot use certain phrases as variable declarations. So if I try to use int, you can see that Visual Studio Code helps me out here and says it knows what an int is, and it has a different type of highlighting on it. And if I try and go ahead and assign it this, Visual Studio Code does not necessarily show an error message here, but this is not valid. You can't use the word int, you can't use the word float, you can't use the word string, or str in Python's case, and you also can't use the keyword bool. Now there are more keywords, and I will link down to them in the description below, but since these words describe certain data types in Python, you cannot assign them a variable, and that's what they mean by reserved. They're reserved by Python and you cannot use them. So now that we know the different types of variables, let's go ahead and just print them out and then call it a day. So the nice thing is we can use the print function again to refer to 1, the letters, and it will print out the number 1. If we go ahead, we go out and print float variable, string variable, bool variable. And so you can see the value of using variables because you can refer to other data types, strings, floats, or ints by using real world words. And it makes it much easier to understand what kind of data is going to be in there, and it explains how you're getting that data. Your variables will explain what you have assigned to it. So we're going to go ahead and run the Python file in the terminal. I'll go ahead and clear this out below here. And if it doesn't run right away, I'm not sure if it's my configuration on my computer or what's going on, but don't worry about it. I will show you how we actually run files through the terminal. So since you installed the Python program onto your computer, you can just type in Python and your computer will realize that it needs to call the Python program to execute the following file. And just make sure you're in your directory that you're using. And then all I have to do is just type in the name of the file. In this case, it's variables.py, and it prints out everything. And you see that it does a couple of things here. One, it prints out the numbers or data that is assigned to the variable. It does not print out these single quotes for the t, and it also does not print out the name of the variable along with it. What you also want to keep note of is that it's printing each one out on its own line. Now this is not because each of these print statements is on its own line. And I will go into the print statement in depth later on, but you can quickly understand that this print function has other things that you can modify with it to make it print how you want to. And it's actually really complex for being one of the easiest functions to use at the beginning of Python. Thank you guys for watching. I hope this was helpful and you understood everything. If you have any questions, leave them down in the comments below and I will respond to you as quickly as possible. Have a great day.